Hello, I'm Lisa Bien, and welcome to Bouncing Back. You only live once, but that doesn't mean that life only gives you one chance. Everyone loves to hear stories of redemption and revival, but the actual process of living those stories isn't entertaining. It's hard work, but the rewards of living through painful change are more profound than anything you've seen on the page or the screen, because they came out of so much adversity. Second chances aren't something people are given, it's something they earn. Today we will hear stories of hard work and second chances. Let's get started. Our first guest truly exemplifies what it means to bounce back from adversity. At 38 years old, Chip Frenette found himself in the custody of the Maryland Division of Corrections. Realizing that his life's path needed to be completely redirected, Chip swore off of alcohol and drugs and the resolve to walk a road of self-improvement. That road eventually led him here to Temple, where he holds a 3.68 GPA. When he graduates, he plans to work in music, radio, photography, or ideally some blend of all three. Thank you for joining us today, Chip. In 1975, Tyrone Werts was sentenced to life without parole as an accomplice to second-degree murder. Less than 4 years ago, Tyrone's sentence was commuted by Governor Rendell out of respect for Tyrone's immense personal growth in the face of adversity. He has made the most of his second chance, working as a public relations consultant to the Inside Our Prison Exchange program here at Temple. Tyrone, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
You know, I think this is one of my most exciting shows. I've been saying it all week. I'm really excited about the show because the two of you truly exemplify what it means to bounce back. So I guess the first question I would like to ask both of you, and I'll address Chip first, is how did you create a life for yourself? How did you create meaning for yourself while incarcerated?
Well, first, thanks for having me in here today. And the question is, at first I was sitting like, how am I going to answer this? But really, I knew that I had other things going on outside. I knew I had. There was a day that they were going to let me out. I was in a situation where you were, where I was like, nothing's going to ever happen. Nothing's ever going to change. So I knew I had to plan. I knew that where I was going was going nowhere. I knew that if I continued to live the way that I was living, I was just going to be back there again. And really, it was quite miserable, and I didn't want to be back there again.
But there had to be something that kept you going. I mean, you were in the confines of prison, you know, so maybe was it truly just knowing that there was a light at the end of the tunnel and you used that time to better yourself while in prison?
Well, I had the support of who's now my wife, my girlfriend, at the time, and I had the support of her, and that was one of those things. That was a big light at the end of that tunnel. Was knowing that she was there for me. She's an incredible support in my life. She's somebody who not only we both strive to help each other be better people all the time, and I knew that I had that there.
That's awesome. So Tyrone, for you, was quite different.
Yes. First of all, thanks for inviting me on your show. Really appreciate being here to tell part of my story. But anyhow, I was sentenced to life in prison, to one of the worst prisons in the country, Gradyford Prison, and the environment at the prison was really barbaric on some levels, right? There was drugs, alcohol, and when I went in there, I was sentenced to life without parole. I was there. I was filled with bitter anger and rage because I didn't think I should have been there for the rest of my life. And so I got caught up in the prison environment. Then I met this extraordinary guy who told me, even in this environment, you got to create a great life for yourself while you're here. And I was 6 months into my incarceration. I had epiphany one night, just based on the conversation I had with this guy, and it made me think about more than just myself. Of course, I think my first 6-7 months there, I was just focused on me, poor me, pity me. And then when I told him that I had a wife, I had a daughter, I had siblings, I had parents, I began to think about that, and I never really thought about the pain and suffering that my family was going through besides myself. And in that moment, I decided I needed to do something different with my life because my life was on a downward spiral.
You raise an excellent point, actually, about having family and how both of you, we all do when we go through times of adversity. We don't mean to do it, but we create pain for our family. How how did each one of you, get through that? You have to get your family to respect you again almost, and have, some regard for you.
Well, it's been a number of years, and most of my family relationships were damaged long before I even found myself incarcerated. I had been on a path of alcoholism and drug addiction for many years since that path began when I was about 12, 13 years old, actually. So I'd already done plenty of damage, and I'm still today repairing that damage. I mean, it's something that didn't come along instantly, and some family members have been great in welcoming me back into their lives, and others have some more difficulty with it, and it's a challenge.
Is it a matter of trust? Is that what you think it is, the challenge? When you suffer from an addiction, you lie to people.
It's a combination of many things. I'm also not the only person in my family with alcohol and drug problems. So I think there's also, in my situation at least, there's people who they see me and they're threatened by the expectations that will be raised of them, I think is what some of the issue is. But then again, that's just purely speculation.
Well, that's too bad for them, because we want to raise everybody's expectations. Yeah. That's why we're here on the show today. Absolutely. And I think your story is great. I love that you met somebody inside, and he was able to give you that. So it seems like that's your mission these days, Tyrone.
Well, that was part of it. The other part was I always had a good relationship with my family, but for myself, right, when that night that I had that epiphany, I realized, because I had told everybody prior to that I was innocent, I had nothing to do with this particular crime, and then when I had this epiphany, I realized I had to begin to start taking responsibility, not just for the crime that happened, but more so for my own life, because my life was out of control, I was reckless, and I knew then that I had to do something different. And the most powerful thing for me that really gave me the freedom to be able to navigate the environment that I was in was the fact that when I decided that I needed to take responsibility, I wrote my family a 4-page letter, because most times, like when you have family and you tell them something, they want to believe you, right? And at the time, I really believed that I was innocent. But when I came to the realization that I was with some guys one night who was committing a crime, I had to take responsibility for that. And I wrote my family a letter, told them I had lied to them, that I had nothing to do with this crime. They told them I was just as guilty as the man that pulled the trigger. And that was really empowering for me. It gave me self-control, self-respect, and it just gave me so much power when I began to do that. So, and I thought that my family really appreciated that I was able to stand up as a man and do that.
That's awesome. So I hear a lot of personal responsibility coming out from both of you, right? Yeah. Writing the letter. I always tell people, if I'm upset, or I tell people, I give advice, I go, write a letter to that person and tell the truth. And then look inside and see how much of you is really in that letter. Take personal responsibility. So having said all that, now you're here on campus. And how's it feel to, be on college campus? And, what are some of your long-term goals or short-term goals?
Well, it's actually a great thing to be here on campus. I love Temple University. My nephew came to visit me a few weeks ago, and I took him here to the campus, and I was just brimming over with emotion and excitement of how, not only what this place has done for me, but also thinking about where I've come. In your introduction, you said that sometimes the road to recovery or whatever isn't always entertaining. It's been a freaking blast for me. It's entertaining as all be for me.
I'm glad you're having fun.
I do. I mean, it was difficult in the beginning for me when I started on that road, but it's always been fun. It's always been entertaining, and I entertain myself with the goals I've accomplished, where I'm going, and what I've done with my life is truly a lot of fun. And I look at how much fun I'm having now, and how much fun it only gets better every day. So it's a load of fun.
I love that. It's a load of fun. Tyrone, you're having fun too, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And plus, I got to acknowledge Temple University for, I had come out of prison, and the Inside Out program hired me as a consultant to do some work for them. And I really love being here, doing the work for Inside Out. It's an incredible program. Actually, we started as a program inside the prison. Now it's an international program. And Temple University has been recognized all around the world as a very a great institution running a novel program that are bringing education to so many different people. So it's incredible.
So what are some of your plans for the future? I know that you go around and you tell your story a lot.
No, but I do travel.
Do we have a book coming out soon?
Well, I am writing a book. Also work for the Public Defender's Association, and I'm a Soros Justice Fellow, right, running a program out in the community. And a lot of that keeps me busy. But actually, my plan is I got to make a living, right? Because, I come out of prison at 60 years old without any Social Security, without any pension or anything like that. So I focus a lot on that. But the main thing that, like when you say finding purpose in prison, when you go through this redemptive process, it reflects introspection. I mean, you really want to take that and you want to help other people. So that's what my fellowship was about. That's the kind of work I was doing inside of prison. That's the kind of work I'm doing now.
Well, what piece of advice, I guess, for both of you I'd ask is, what piece of advice would you give to anybody right now listening to our show and watching the show? What piece of advice would you say if they're struggling with real bad adversity?
Yeah. Well,
I embrace it. I talk to people constantly, and on campus, I have no problem telling people that, I did some time and I had drug and alcohol problems for two reasons. One, so that they know if they have a problem and they have somebody they need to talk to, they can come to me and I can, at least, guide them or something, tell them a little bit about what I did. But also it's keeping my eye on the prize, in the end, which is my happiness and the happiness of my wife as well, and the people around me that I surround myself and that I love.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I want to echo what Chip said, but also I think that what is important, no matter what you're going through in life, I want to give people the same advice that was given to me. First of all, you got to be honest with yourself and recognize, whatever problem you had. And I can tell you one story. There was a guy that was in prison with me, and he was really energetic, really smart, hardworking. Every time he came to prison, he would go home 6 months, 8 months later, he'd be back, and he'd just pick up where he left off. He was computer literate, he was very smart, could write, and all that. And then, after the third or fourth time, I said to him, I don't understand it, man. Why do you keep coming back and forth to prison? He said, well, I got this drug problem. And I said, well, you know what? I don't think drugs is your problem. I think drugs is your solution. You need to go find out what your problem is and why you feel the need to anesthetize yourself against those problems. And then he went back home. I never saw him again. Never even thought about him until one day I walked in my cell and there was a card for him saying, Tyrone, nobody had ever told me that before. I just want you to know I just graduated with my master's degree from Lincoln University. I'm dedicated to you. So I say that to say that once you recognize what your problem is, you be honest with yourself. And then the advice that I was given, no matter where you are, just create a great life for yourself.
You know what? That's the greatest. That's great advice, and I can't thank you both enough for being on the show. I just want to give you both a hug because I feel like this is just great stories and everybody needs to hear your stories. So thank you for being our guest today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Professor Jerry Stahler is a clinical psychologist who has spent more than 20 years at Temple's Department of Geography and Urban Studies. Jerry has spent decades studying the internal and external difficulties faced by people who grow up in difficult neighborhoods. And he has worked on the community-based treatments for neighborhoods that are bouncing back from large-scale adversity. I'm so glad to have you here with us today, Jerry. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa.
We've heard some amazing stories. I mean, I'm just like blown away by both of them, Chip and Tyrone. We've heard about addiction and incarceration, and we both know that there's a lot of stigma surrounding both of those words. So what advice could you give for Chip and Tyrone?
Well, first of all, Lisa, thank you for inviting me to be on the show. And although I'm the supposed expert,
you are the expert.
I want to say that I'm very humbled to be part of the panel because the two gentlemen that you just had on are truly the experts since they've lived through the adversity and have bounced back remarkably well. I think stigma is really a tremendous barrier to bouncing back for anybody who's been incarcerated, for anybody who has an addiction. I think that in terms of advice of how you overcome that, I think one of the things that we make a mistake about in terms of society and how we view addiction is that addiction is viewed as sort of a willpower problem or viewed as something that's a problem for the individual and is not recognized as a brain disease. And people who have an addiction have their brains altered in a certain way by the substances. And they end up having, you see the behavior consequences, such as lying and stealing and all of those things. And it's a very difficult kind of disease to overcome. But the nature of it is, it's a chronic relapsing disease. And hopefully someday, just like cancer used to be a disease that nobody talked about, that had stigma, hopefully in the future we'll get to the same place with addiction.
Well, I guess if we talk about stigma, though, honestly, aren't there stigmas around everything that we do? And, whether you're bouncing back from incarceration or you're bouncing back from being an alcoholic, you're bouncing back from personal bankruptcy, there's always stigma surrounding it, right? So I guess is there any advice that you could give people to maybe how they can talk themselves or coach themselves through these things we call stigmas, that we put labels on people is really what we do. We're so quick to label everybody in society. Oh, you're this, you're that.
Well, I think one of the problems is, if you have an addiction and if you've been incarcerated, those are stigmas that are just incredibly huge.
But why do we
overcome.
find it so difficult, right, as a society to say, Tyrone and Chip, they went to prison. They paid their dues. They worked hard. They probably have worked harder than, the average person has worked hard to pay, but we as a society have such issue with that,
Well, incarceration, you pay your debt to society, and it's the debt that you keep paying. It doesn't go away. And in a competitive, job market, it's so difficult for people who come out of prison. They've spent time behind bars instead of developing job skills, job experience. Often there's a problem with, educational attainment. And you put these individuals, and there's 700,000 people being released every year.
Wow.
So you multiply our two guests by that number. It's a huge number of people coming out every year, and in a competitive economy, if you have a record, it's just very, very difficult. So how do you expect people to succeed? That's why one of the routes, I guess, is education, by improving your educational attainment, and both Chip and Tyrone have clearly taken that route. But it's a tremendously uphill battle, and I tell you, I'm totally in awe of people who have bounced back like Chip and
Tyrone. So my next question actually lends itself quite nicely, is they've bounced back. You bring up an excellent point. They're educated. Mm-hmm. Now what? Do they put the fact that they were incarcerated on their resume? It's a lapse of time, right? Mm-hmm. So how do they clearly articulate, or how do they communicate that they've had this lapse of time, what they've done to overcome this, and now they're in the work world? How are we going to get them? How are we going to get them jobs?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, one of the problems is that employers do background checks, right? And so, it's not something you can hide. But I think by doing the kinds of things and getting the support that they have and developing their social networks, I think that's pretty. You can only control what you can control yourself. You can't control what other people think.
That's an excellent point. We can only control what we control ourselves, and I think Tyrone was saying about that self-belief and and how incredibly important that is. And I think that we all need to remember that how important that is. So now, what advice could you give anybody that is starting over, I guess, if you will?
Well, I think do whatever you can to improve your skills, your competitive skills, improve your educational attainment, try to have positive social networks, and most of all, it sounds like what they did, which was so important, is not give up hope.
I'm just taking that in for a second because I love that, not give up hope. I always, when I was going through myself a really hard time, I had a bracelet that said hope. And I think that we see jewelry lots of times that say hope, love, and that all means something when we look at it, strength, whatever it may be. But let's go back to, we were talking a little bit about addiction and the impact that addiction has on a family, right? And I know that you and I spent some time talking about this. So Chip suffered from addiction. Right now he has to regain the confidence of his family. That's a tough nut to crack.
It's very, very tough for anybody who has a family member who has suffered from the disease of addiction. I think as Chip put it, there's damaged relationships. And, one of the big issues is trust. And because of the nature of the disease, it takes a very, very long time to build that trust. And I think you have to take baby steps, and it's like the time, you just need a lot of time.
But so we're talking about Chip, right? But seriously, but how does the family, you know what I mean? What advice would you give to the family? Like Chip comes out, he's like, I'm no longer an alcoholic. I'm recovered and I'm out of prison. How can the family really trust them again, other than time? I mean, is there steps that he could take to rebuild that trust?
Well, I think part of what the family has to do is they have to kind of readjust how they view the family member who has suffered from addiction. And for the individual, if they're continuing to take positive steps in their recovery, going to meetings of whatever, staying clean and sober, having trustworthy behaviors, it's a gradual process. And it takes years. And I think forgiveness is a huge risk for family members, because you kind of feel like you've been duped once, you've been duped many times. So why should I trust this person now? What's different? And it's up to the individual to show that they are taking positive steps, that they are in recovery and being active in their recovery.
I think a key word that you said actually is forgiveness, right? And I think that sometimes we all forget to forgive ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that the young people, we're here on campus and there's a lot of young people here. I think that the young people today sometimes forget to forgive themselves.
Self-forgiveness is a huge challenge. I think most people are probably harder on themselves than they are on others. And sometimes you just have to stop that thought and think about, well, how can I treat myself kindly? How can I silence or quiet that voice in the back of my head that says, that is so negative, and treat yourself like you would treat a loved one, with forgiveness, compassion, and kindness.
I always like to say, treat yourself like your own best friend, right?
That's a great idea.
So if you wouldn't say it to your best friend, why would you say it to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Is there any other advice that we could give young people today before we close?
Any other advice? Well,
we want them to. we could spend a whole show on that, but
Yes.
Is there one piece of we're telling them to forgiveness, treat themselves? I guess if someone's feeling that they're needing to talk to somebody,
I think you have to reach out. Don't ever suffer in silence. You need to reach out to somebody you trust, and that could be a family member, a friend, it could be a professional, and really to get help before whatever problem you're suffering from becomes worse, because usually problems do become worse if you don't take care of them.
That's like the best way to end the show. Do not suffer in silence. That's great advice. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on our show today.
You're welcome, Lisa. Thank you.
Today's guests have proven that even in the most hopeless situations possible, we all have it within ourselves to overcome the adversity that life throws into our paths. It can take weeks, months, even years, even decades. But if we've learned anything today, it's that we can be inspired by the hard-earned lessons of change that others have been good enough to share. We'll see you next time on Bouncing Back.